Welcome everybody to our theme Thursday. And this time we have an artist with us who a number of us have studied with, Glen. Glen, hello.
Hello.
And Glen, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background? How did you get into being a painter, number one?
Well, the art was always encouraged in my family. My mom is a watercolorist. She's an amazing painter, 93 years old, and still showing at the San Diego Watercolor Society. Signature member of Watercolor West. And we used to, my parents used to keep a canvas and acrylics on the dining room table. And it was kind of a family painting. And then anybody who wanted to sit down and paint could work on the picture. And so it was kind of a rotation of whoever wanted to paint could add their 2 cents. So we kind of grew up that way. And I've always, had a passion for painting. I'm kind of a cliche in a sense that I would draw the people in the classroom and stuff rather than taking notes. And rather than listening to the lecture, I would draw pictures of the teacher and such. And it just kind of, I always saw it as, for me, it was kind of my touchstone to understanding what was around me and to communicating and studying the world and studying myself and whatnot. So it was just a language, really expressive language. My daughter is an art therapist with a private practice up in Dana Point. In fact, she's working on her second book right now on therapy for families using art and so on. So it's just always been important to it. We've always felt that the arts are extremely important to a culture, to our family, to each of us individually. So I've always done that. I started with watercolors, actually, and doing the figure. And then I got into oils and then moved into pastels. I do oils still, but pastel really is my medium of choice, and it's my go-to medium.
Great. Well, Otto, do you have any questions for Glen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate Glen on all the awards he's been winning in the past years, but it seems like lately he's just been racking them up, right?
It's been COVID has been good to me.
So congratulations on that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
But you mentioned that many of us have taken classes from Glen, and me being one of them. And what I love about Glen and his teaching is that he's very thorough. And it's just, he's one of those instructors where you feel like there really isn't a dumb question, right? You ask and he explains it until you can digest it and then put it to practice. So I truly appreciate that. So Glen, in all your years of teaching, what do you think has been the most valuable lesson, not just for you, but for your students that you've taught?
Wow. Boy, that's a tough one. What I really try to I guess it would be express, don't copy, and communicate, share. I think that particularly for newer artists, the temptation, and I'll be talking about this certainly because it's a real curse of using photographs, is the tendency to want to copy what you see. And I think the most important thing that anybody can come away with or to learn is that our subjects are really there for us to study and to understand and to respond to. interact with, and communicate about. And that emotion is probably the touchstone to any good art that you have experienced, expressed, communicated emotion, and the viewer has felt emotion in looking at the art. You can't get that by copying things. You gotta reach inside.
Well, that deserves a round of applause. Thank you. That was excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for that, Glenn, because you know what, like I said, I really appreciate taking your workshop, and I learned a lot from that. So I sincerely appreciate it. All right, well,
I miss you guys.
I know. It's been a while.
I want to say one thing, Glenn, because what I admire so much about you, and you came and taught a workshop and did a demo for Pastel Society of Southern California several years ago.
Yeah.
I still have a copy of that tape. I don't think you know that. We didn't put it up publicly, but I still have that on my private YouTube. But anyway, the beauty of what you do is in the personality of the figures that you are able to achieve. I mean, because you're putting, and you're going to tell us more about that, I'm sure, tonight with reference photos, but the way you're able to sculpt, and you know, their tummies are a little enlarged and their legs, and they're exaggerated and beautiful figures. And that's what is so wonderful, that when you talk about expressing, that's expressive.
Oh, thank you.
And I appreciate that so much.
That's why I like to hang out with you guys. You're so kind. You're so kind. When I show my mom what I'm working on, she always tells me it's wonderful, but I can always tell what she thinks, because she goes, "Oh yeah, that's nice." Or, "Oh yeah, that's nice."
Moms do, right?
So I can always pick up, but you guys are always so supportive and encouraging, and I do appreciate it, truly.
Well, this is not only art appreciation, but it's artist appreciation.
Well, I guess, Glenn, you can start in with your program as such.
Sounds good.
And one of the members privately emailed me to ask people to mute if they, until you get to a point where you're asking questions or whatever.
Okay. And if since people are, I'm assuming people can unmute themselves.
Yes.
So
right,
that
yeah,
if they,
right.
I would just ask people, if you have a question at any point, just unmute yourself and blare it out.
Sounds great.
Okay? Just sing out, and because I'm sure it will be in context, it'll kind of be at the moment, and you're not going to want 30 minutes later to say, "What was I going to ask?" Like
I do have a recommendation. If you have a question, this is Kath, identify who you are before you ask your question, so that Glenn will know which one of you is asking.
Okay, now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going to a screen share, and my setup, my studio is my garage, and it is my studio and our laundry room. So it's not conducive to working in the evening out there. I do have some lights and stuff that if I'm really pushing on something, I can manage. But I'm not able to really do anything in terms of being live with demonstrating something. So what I've done is yesterday I made a videotape that a QuickTime movie that's about 60 minutes long. And what I'm going to do is I have stuff I want to talk about leading into it, and some examples to show and so on. And then I'm going to go into the video that I did, a demonstration, and then talk along with that. I didn't talk through any of it. I just drew and painted. And then I actually went out this morning and worked on it some more, and I ended up spending another couple of hours on it. So you'll see what the kind of the current state is of the piece as well. So I'm going to go ahead and, well, actually, before I jump to screen sharing, let me just say a couple of things about photo reference. I think that it's sometimes, some people kind of look askew at the idea of working from photographs rather than exclusively working from life. And certainly with, there's certainly some valid consideration there, but I think photos are an extremely valuable tool for the artist, but I think you have to keep in mind what it means to use a photo reference. Photo reference is not photocopying. It's the practice of discovering and learning, gathering information about your subject using photographic information to do that. So there are all kinds of advantages to it, of course, and I've made myself actually some notes so I don't leave everything out. There's all kinds of advantages to it, like it's always available. I don't always have models available to me, and in fact, my home, my studio situation isn't really set up to have live models in my home. So using photographs was a way for me to work with the figure, but to be able to do it in a sustained way anytime I wanted, day or night, at any moment that I wanted. It didn't have to be scheduled and arranged and so on. It also has a lot of advantages in, like, the lighting doesn't change. The subject doesn't move. The weather doesn't kick up, so that we're on a, excuse me, so that the, you're caught in a rainstorm or something when you're painting. It's easy to put away. If you have a still life set up and your lighting and everything, invariably somebody's going to come and move the apple or move the lights out of the way or something like that, and you have to recreate it. So there are all kinds of good things. It also, because of the technology that we have, it allows us to take a really close look at our subject and to really study it intently and intentionally. You can manipulate the images, you can use applications to investigate shapes and to explore structure and form. You can use it to, again, as a study guide, a study tool, using photographs, using applications to change things into 2 or 3 value designs, just with a click, not for the purpose of copying it, not for the purpose of it providing you the answers, but rather for the purpose of it providing you information to help you learn about how light works, how form is revealed, the simplification of shapes, and so on. So lots of good stuff, but there's also a lot of bad stuff about it. And I've already kind of alluded to one of the bad things. There's a tremendous temptation, particularly with new students, to copy the photograph, to see the photograph as something that they want their painting to look like. And it doesn't matter if it's a good photograph or not. And there are a lot of bad photographs out there. And there is a lot of bad photo reference that people try to use to create their art from, to reference for their art, and they're really stymied by the again, the temptation to copy, to include everything in the picture, to focus on detail, which cameras are notoriously good at. It's all about the detail and the focus, rather than about the simplified shapes and the larger value patterns and so on. Photographs do not, they can't see the color that your eye sees. So when you stand and look at the ocean and you look at its depth and you look at the layers of color and reflected light and refracted light and the layering of color as it moves up from the sand and the fish and the seaweed and the surface and the spectral highlights and all of that, the photographs don't see all of that subtlety. And so you miss out on some of that. The photographs also don't record value correctly. The cameras are designed to average things to try to get the best average picture. Sometimes you'll go out and you'll look at a beautiful lighting and view and looking across at the mountains and whatever, and you pick up your camera and you just feel the warmth of the light laying across the top of a tree, or the shadow as it changes its temperature as it's moving from horizontal to vertical planes and back onto horizontal planes and different reflected lights. And you just see this wonderful, engaging, exciting experience that you have with the light and your subject. And you take a picture of it and you put the picture up and you go, it just isn't what you saw. It wasn't what you experienced. It doesn't contain that emotion. The camera cannot do that on its own. Okay, so, and I'll show you some ways to get around a little bit of that, but you have to know it. You have to know that you can't trust the values. You cannot trust the color, that you use it for some information to glean, to learn as much as you can about your subject, but it doesn't tell you everything there is to know about your subject. You have to study, observe, paint outside of the photographic image in order to elevate your art, I think, so that it's truly based on discovery, knowledge, and expression. Okay, so I'm going to move to screen share over here. And hopefully if I close some things, I'm not closing you guys. So, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so bear with me just a moment as I close some of these things that we're getting into here. Okay, one of the things I was talking about exposure as a problem and values and color. Okay, this was a photograph I took at Sunset Cliffs in San Diego, and it was a bright sunny day, and the pictures, this is out of the camera. This is how it came out of the camera. Okay, the cameras have a tendency to underexpose the darks and to overexpose the lights. So your sky, which is your light source, is generally going to be washed out and overexposed, and your shadows are going to tend to look like dark pits. okay, and kind of blackened out and not have any color in them or anything like that. This is the same picture overexposed, where I can now discover what the structure was inside these caverns and what was going on with the water moving up into those shadow areas. Okay, and I can also begin to see some more variation through this overexposure. I can begin to see variation in the temperature as we're moving from this angled plane that's catching some more reflected light to this more vertical plane. This has got a lot more red in it. This is getting a lot more yellow in it, and then dipping into these cooler planes as it's dipping underneath in here. So I'm beginning to get some suggestions of variations by manipulating the photograph a little bit and looking at color temperature. But more importantly, I use overexposure to get into the shadows where I can keep my larger pattern of shadow, but I can also see the subtlety or the nuance within those shadow shapes of what's going on. Okay, so that's just a little, you can see again as shot. Okay, let me get this one away. Okay. The let me tell you a little bit about my equipment. I use both my iPhone to take pictures, and I have a Nikon 600 digital single lens reflex camera with interchangeable lenses. That's what I shoot about 99% of my pictures with my Nikon. Having good photographs is real valuable. It's not essential, but it can save you a lot of grief, a lot of aggravation. The camera itself is your first step in composing your picture in many cases, because you're making a lot of decisions in using the camera before you click the shutter, which are artistic decisions. You're deciding which direction you're going to, first you're deciding what you're going to take a picture of. Okay, you're deciding which direction you're going to be facing. If you're outdoors, is the sun going to be at your back? Is it going to be in front of you? Is it going to be to one side or another? You're making a decision about the time of day. How high is the sun when you take the picture? Or how low? Is it in the morning, in the afternoon, the evening? Because the color of the light changes dramatically. The length of the shadows change dramatically. Okay, the mood of the image changes dramatically with those kinds of things. You're looking at how close you're going to be to your subject or how far away, or if you're going to zoom in, how you're going to crop it with the viewfinder. You're looking at your angle of view. You're looking at your horizon line and where you're going to place it in the viewfinder, or if it's even going to be in the viewfinder, if it's going to be outside the picture frame. You're looking at a lot of things when you take a picture, and that's one of the reasons why you don't want to use other people's pictures to paint from. Okay, so I'm going to segue just a little bit here because I think it's really important that people understand the use of pictures and the importance, if you're doing original art, that it really needs to be original photographic reference that you have captured yourself because of all of those decisions that were made before the picture was taken. So there's a lot of artistic expression, as it were, that goes into the picture. So copying something out of National Geographic or taking something, even if it's free public domain kind of stuff off of the internet or something like that, there's a difference between reference and copy. If you wanted to look at a bird on the internet and study and understand how the feathers lay and what the structure of the head is, and then you're going to use that knowledge as you are doing birds in your paintings, that's one thing. But if you're if it's a derivative painting, if the painting derives from the photograph, if you're making it look like the photograph, it's not original. You'll find that a lot of the competitions, in fact, virtually every one of the competitions expressly says that you cannot submit anything that you have where you have used photos that weren't taken by the artist. In the IAPS rules and regulations, they write, work must be original, not copied from other artists or published materials, and from your own reference. Any reference provided by an instructor is not eligible, including an instructor provided photo, still life setup or model setup. So when we're talking about original art, also you have to keep your photo references in context when you're using them to make sure that you're sensitive to that. There are ethical considerations of misrepresentation where somebody feels that they're buying an original piece of art. And I'm sure that everybody is kind of in tune with that, but I was very surprised within the last couple of months, a person posted on Facebook that they were very excited about an award they had received, and it was a substantial award. And they wanted to thank the, kind of give credit to the instructor whose workshop they did the painting in and who set up the still life and the lighting and all of that sort of stuff, because they were questioned about it. And the person says, well, I didn't know you couldn't do that. And I guess they just had, and it really kind of amazed me that would happen at that level. And it was a beautiful painting. There was no question about it, but it wasn't original. Okay, so I kind of beat that drum a little bit. I'm going to get this out of the way. This is just a image of one of my little kids that I have here. When you're preparing or to use the photographs, see, this is my problem. I have a tendency to, I have too much to say. So you know what I'm going to do? Very quickly, I'm going to move into some other stuff, and then I'll maybe as I'm showing, as this movie is going on, I'll talk about some of these other issues. I've always been fascinated with the figure. I've always loved doing the figure. I never had any art classes. I studied history and philosophy in college, but between classes, I would go down and sketch in the life drawing class, even though I never took any classes. When I started doing life drawing, I was most fascinated by the poses between poses. In other words, when the model wasn't modeling, that was when I found the gestures and the shapes, the expression to be most interesting to me, most engaging. I also loved doing quick gesture studies, 1 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute, far more than I liked doing the 3-hour poses. I wanted to capture in simple line, very quickly, movement, gesture, expression, and so on. And I also liked to fill my paper with figures. I liked to never knowing what the next pose was going to be, I would find a place for it, or I would have maybe 2 or 3 sheets of paper going at the same time. And what I would do is I would draw a 2-minute sketch, and the model would take a new pose, and then I'd find a place for it. And if I couldn't find a place for it on page 1, I'd put it on page 2. And then on the 3rd pose would come up, and I'd decide, does that go on page 1 or page 2? Where will it be? How large will it be? What will the relationship be? Here's a quick sketch of an assemblage of life drawing gesture poses that looks at just that assembly of images, of figures, the overlapping, finding interest in negative spaces between the figures, relating the figures to one another, finding a composition and building a composition around it, where my assumption was that every person, when you take a position or a pose or express a movement, that to get to the next movement, there has to be movement. And so we're constantly in a state of dance, as it were. And what I wanted to do is take that unchoreographed movement and express it visually by the relationship of the images on the page. I also would tell my students that when I would take pictures of birds on a wire, the birds had no artistic sensibility whatsoever. And they never were facing the right way. There was always some bird that was doing something stupid. And I would throw a rock at them and get them to land on the wire again. And they were too evenly spaced, or they were boring in their composition. It never seemed quite right. So I would need to rearrange them. So what I found with the photographs is that I could take those images and I could do what I was doing in the studio, but I could use photo references of something like birds, and I could look at shapes, light, composition, and simply go through dozens of photographs and pick out off of those photos images that I liked the shapes, I found something interesting in it, and lay them on the paper, and then find places to put things. Or if I had holes, I need something to go in here, or this is too circular, I need it to be broken up, or I need to overlap and link these shapes together. And so I would explore, through the use of photo reference, explore compositions and design and shapes, positive and negative, and connected shapes. I did the same thing. Here is a page of stuff using photo reference. Put some people, I grabbed some animals, some fruit, anything I had pictures of, and looked at just putting them on a piece of paper and arranging them and overlapping and connecting and exploring negative space, exploring color, value patterns of shadow and light, and so on. Here's one of, whoops, that's the one that we just showed you. Here's people at the beach. Just the shapes of people, the shapes of light, the shapes of shadow, building a kind of a random arbitrary composition of just allowing your eye to move through and flow. There's kind of an S pattern going on here compositionally, but I wanted to put something down here to bring your eye back up. So making decisions with each element that you add to the piece of paper that support or help build the composition. one of the things that I have to confess to is as much as I respect it, I am not a thumbnail person. And so my compositions evolve as I react to and respond to the paper and the image. The way I got into the I've got so much stuff I wish I could share with you, but I'm gonna come in here. I'm gonna start this, and I'm gonna talk about it as we're just as you're watching me work. I got into working with the photo references because I reached a point in my life drawing where I was I felt like I was at an impasse. I didn't feel like my work was progressing, and and I wanted to learn more, understand more, be more consistent in my work, be more confident in what I was doing. So I got a life-size skeleton. I got anatomy books. I got some wonderful books that analyzed the drawings of the masters anatomically and so on. And I knew that I wanted to be able to do more sustained, more complex drawings, but I wanted the same immediacy and spontaneity of those 1-minute gesture poses, and of those moments between poses that were candid moments of people simply expressing themselves through the way their body moved and so on, or the way they stood, the way they shifted their weight, and I wanted to paint people in a natural environment. I wanted to look at the figure and study the figure, but I wanted to be in a natural setting with people engaged in something and expressing themselves more naturally and not posed, because I knew that I preferred the expression of people with their when they weren't posing and when we were off center. Models have a tendency to think of the center of the stage as the forward-facing of the pose, and I would always position myself off to one side. Lighting is typically looked at for the revealing form the best by being at a 45-degree up above the head, coming down reveals form the best, but I liked backlighting, I liked side lighting or 3/4 from the back. I liked the shapes that were created, and I was more interested in shape than form. I did this quick sketch and I all of a sudden says, this is all screwed up. I don't really like this at all. And so I think I'm going to wipe it off and start over again. And I'm going to make it smaller. I'm going to move it more to the left. I want to get the hand in more. And so I'm working on with a vine charcoal, medium vine charcoal here. You'll see that my lines, they tend to be very gestural, very fluid, very a lot of contour kind of drawing, because I'm looking for shapes and so on. Looking at this photograph, this was just a little girl that was playing at the beach, and the image by itself is very nice, but I wanted to tell a little bit more of a story, and I also wanted to show you guys a little bit about combining images. So after I get her in here a little bit more, I'm going to be introducing another element to the painting. I'm already liking the angle of the face a little bit better here. The size is a lot better. Drawing, to me, you'll see that I do look at the photographic image a lot as I'm drawing. For me, drawing is all about, it's really only a few skills needed in drawing, but they're skills that are difficult to master. It's basically seeing plumb lines, being able to match angles, and judge proportion. If you can do those three things, you can draw anything. When I talk about plumb lines, I'm talking about vertical plumb lines, horizontal plumb lines, or extensions of rays when you're matching an angle as to what does that align with? What does that point align with, that mark that you're making? You also see that I kind of move around the whole thing and I reference everything I'm doing with the marks I've already made. So I'm going to go from her belly, I'll probably come right up into her knee when I get to that, because I can mark that point of a change of shape. And it's going to come into now the pale. So each of those elements simply becomes a landmark for me to lay in the next line. I'm looking at where am I starting, where am I ending, and how am I going to get there? And that's basically the concept of a line. It has those three features to it. Where is it starting? Where is it ending? And how did you get there? Yep, change of heart. Want to rethink this just a little bit. And this very much is how I work. If you see progress pictures of mine, you'll see lots of dirty paper underneath it. A lot of those erased marks and so on, because I'm really trying to capture just that expressive line, that shape, that gesture over here. The when you're working with the photographs, there are a number of things that you need to consider, which I tend not to consider at all because of the way I work. But but it's important to understand the relationship between the photograph that you're using and the piece of paper that you're working on. The first thing you have to do is you have to decide the image that you're going to use. Obviously, what's the subject? What are you going to do a picture of? And then you have to consider whether or not you want to put it, what format you're going to do it in. Are you going to do it in a landscape format, a portrait format? Is it going to be a square format? You know, what are you going to, which direction are you going to face the paper? I decided in this one to use a landscape format, but I'll show you before we finish an example of the same image done in a portrait format, and how different the composition is and how different the entire painting looks based on a shift in format. The second thing you have to consider is the aspect ratio, that if you are using tick marks to identify kind of where things fall on the photograph in relation to the paper, the aspect ratio of the paper to the photograph have to be the same. In other words, is it a 2:3, a 3:4? You know, is this an 8:10, 9:12, 11:14? What is the shape of the paper and the shape of the photograph that you're using? Because if you try to take something that is like my paper here is 19 by 25. If I were using tick marks and trying to match the tick marks on a 19 by 25 piece of paper, drawing paper, to a 9 by 12 photograph, I would get all kinds of distortion and weird stuff going on because it wouldn't fit within the marks. They wouldn't align properly. So consider your aspect ratio. One way to get the proper aspect ratio, if you're using the tick marks and so on, and you're not sure where that stuff should fall out, is to lay the upper left-hand corner of the photograph up into the left-hand corner of your piece of paper, and to draw a diagonal through the, do I get to see this? No, I can't show you with a pointer. To draw a diagonal from the upper left-hand corner of the photograph through the lower right-hand corner of the photograph, and continue that diagonal down across your piece of paper. Any vertical and horizontal line that you draw where the vertical and the horizontal line come together on that diagonal line will have the same aspect ratio as your photograph. So you can make any size image or any size picture frame have the same aspect ratio as the photograph if the diagonal of the photograph is the diagonal of your shaped out, of what you've blocked out for your drawing space. Did that make sense? Hopefully. And if you have a question about that, I can show you. I've decided to put this dog in. I just thought he was just told a nice story. Added a little interest, a little bit of relationship, something else going on that was more than the little girl playing here. And I'm just setting up again a shape, just kind of almost like a silhouette, a basic looking at design. I like the way he comes around and enters the picture plane and turns into the girl. I like the way her arm comes up from the right-hand side and in that diagonal that gives it an energy, and it leads up to her head, and then her looking down into the pail brings your eye back down to the head of the dog. The diagonal of the stick in the dog's mouth also points you back over to her hand, to the extended hand, and brings you back around. So we end up with actually something of a triangle going on over here compositionally. If you go from the tip of her head down to his back feet, across to her hand, and then back up to her head, we have this triangular composition with him turning into her so that your eye follows him going into the little girl. I like the repetition of the triangles because I not only have a larger triangular composition of the related figures, I've got the triangle created by her bent knee coming up and the little negative space under the leg of the triangle there. So there's a little bit of repetition going on there with shape, which I think adds some consistency to it. I haven't even taken the price tag off of my lower right-hand corner there. That'll come off soon. I'm in search right now of what I'm going to start off with for some color for my pastels to start laying stuff in. And I start with my darks, with my shadows. I usually start with a middle dark. Oh, I guess I wasn't quite ready for that. I'm still thinking out. I think what I did is I was trying to understand, because the photo image didn't show me kind of what was a little bit of the form there of the shapes, and also the way that the hair came over the ear and so on. So I use a monitor that I connect my computer to. I rarely use printed material. I did in this case so that you could see the image that I was working with when I started it. But I have it on a fairly large television monitor that I project onto with my computer, and I can go in with Photoshop and I can adjust the curves of the values so I can look into the shapes on the hair and understand better how it lays over the ear, or just get a little bit more information, more knowledge of the shapes of some of the elements. And that's probably what I was doing there, is I was making an adjustment on the image so that I could understand that face just a little bit better, the way it, the turn of the head, that slight turn and downward look and so on. I usually start with a cool middle dark, and I block in all of my shadows. Sometimes I'll just use a single stick of pastel and I'll go over everything with it. I keep it very loose. This is not a coloring book exercise. This is gestural. It's capturing shape and pattern. There's a turn in that hand and that arm. So structurally, I've got a side plane there a little bit more. You'll notice that's a much flatter on the top of the arm and rounder on the upper arm. So you'll see a variation there in the shadow edge. I'm looking for edges. I'm just blocking it in. I'm looking for the edges of my shadows as they come up against the light. I think in two values. It's how I think. The two values are in the light and in the shade. So I'll start off typically with my in the shade and find those shapes and the way that they're revealed through the structure and the form. I try to follow the form, but I'm more interested in the shape. Shape is something that's flat. Form is something that's three-dimensional. So from a, gotta get rid of him. So from a shape standpoint, that's going to give me my design. The shapes will give me the design of my painting. I see cast shadow, reflection into the sand. I also use a mid-toned paper, a neutral gray. Sometimes I'll use a warmer gray, sometimes a cooler gray, but I like using a middle value paper because anything that's darker than the paper is a dark, and anything that's lighter than the paper is light. So I've established by the color of my paper, my value scheme. And then it allows me to see that relationship. So I always select something darker than the paper for my shadows and something lighter than the paper for my lights. I always go, I say always, I never always, but I typically, I guess, would say that I'll use a very warm light and I'll use a very cool shadow to start, with enough variation in value to distinguish the light and shade from the neutral background, from the mid-tone. One of the things that I do a lot of, I'll show you examples. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to fast forward through some of this so that we can, because I have some things I also want to show you, and we only have a half hour left, but I want to show you some examples of cropping and some examples of altering images using with the photographs, and doing a block in without drawing, using the design, the shapes revealed by the photograph. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this forward a little bit. We're going to speed it up. One of the things that you'll see me doing here is in the shadows, I have a tendency to put warm over cool, and that gives me some really beautiful reflected light. You'll also see me addressing this negative space. I'm just scribbling it in, but I'm really interested in revealing what those shapes are, that negative space is. And I'm always thinking here about balance. So I don't just do one side and say, oh, I'm working on the space up behind her back now. I move it around so that I'm always moving my color and my value around to look at the balance of values and the balance of shapes and the sizes of shapes. Okay. I'm going to speed up here a little bit. Up, here comes the dog. Just blocking in light and shade. Once I've got that middle light for the light and that middle dark for the dark up against that middle value, that mid-tone value of the background, then I can begin to intensify the light, intensify the darks, and develop my transition from light to dark. So you'll notice up in her bicep and in the deltoid of the upper part of her arm there, that I've added a warm transition that softened that edge to show the rolling of that shoulder going from the shadow towards the light and making a softer rounded transition. I also wanted to warm that up a bit because our shoulders tend to be warm. There are also areas of the face that are zones of color. We have a tendency typically for the forehead to be more in the yellow gray colors, the middle section of the face to be redder, and the lower portion of the face to be bluer. And so I keep that in mind a little bit as I'm selecting my violets, or I'm graying down colors as I'm adding reflected light and as I'm warming or cooling sections. We also know that in revealing form, that the softer or the smoother or more gradual the transition is from dark to light, the more rounded the form is. And the more abrupt the transition is from dark to light, the more abrupt the plane change is on the form. So if you consider looking at a ball and the way the light moves across a ball and goes from highlight to light to mid-tone to terminator, to core shadow, to occlusion shadow, reflected light, and so on, all of these stages of transition. And then you look at a block, you go from light to dark to middle, depending on how the light strikes the block. You don't have that very gradual, subtle variation. However, I find that every transition from light to dark has a midtone between it. And that midtone may be very slight, or it may be more exaggerated, more expressed. there may be more variation in that transition. But you'll see that looking at her arm, that the extension of the arm, I've left that shadow so far pretty crisp in terms of that distinction between light and shade, where I've softened it and made it more gradual, and the upper part where the muscle is more rounded, to express that plane change as one being more rounded and one being more cylinder-like, or more block-like, I should say. I like to follow the form with my strokes and my marks. I'm going to come along here. Now I'm coming in. You thought that was dark before. Now we're starting to bring in some darker darks. And they're starting to pop out. Wanted to bring in, start looking at some of the occlusion shadows and some of those stronger things. I want to look at accents. I'm strengthening the light in some areas, and I'm developing more form. I'm bringing in some warmth over those cool shadows, getting more reflected light. Putting a little pattern in the bathing suit. Get working in on the dog. One of the things that I always look to do, everything has warm and cool in it. And I always look in my paintings to find places. It may be a warmer or cooler variation of a color, of a hue, or it may be an actual hue change. But I always look within a value passage. I always look for the warm and cool expression within that value. And when I'm making color choices, the first thing I look at is value. The second thing I look at is temperature. And then the third thing I look at is hue. So the color per se is the last thing I consider when I'm selecting a pastel stick. I look at my darks, I look at warm and cools, and then I said, oh, and by the way, do I want that to be a blue? Do I want that to be a green? Where do I want that to be on the color wheel? There was reflection of another person standing over on this left-hand side of the girl, and I really liked that as a way to hold your eye in and narrow this space here a little, to bring it a little bit tighter. I also liked the suggestion that there was a person, perhaps a parent or something, standing here, reflected in the sand, warm colors up against the cool blue reflection of the sky and the water, and then kind of framing in this section of the painting here, which is where my accents are going to be, where my strongest contrast is going to be, where your eye is going to come back to. So I really liked and kept in that element, but I did have to consider now, because I've introduced this dog, I also have to think about the dog in terms of position and size and shape. I didn't like this. The pail had a handle on it, a yellow handle. And I thought that was really distracting. So I've taken a paintbrush and I'm wiping off the pastel. So I'm back down to the tooth. It's a soft paintbrush. It doesn't damage or disturb the tooth of the paper at all. And it pretty much removes it, and I can just come right over it. Oops, I guess I was going to try it one more time. Eventually I eliminated it. There, I eliminated it. I said, get rid of it altogether. I don't like it. Got the reflection of the pale coming in. Okay, I'm going to stop this here, and I'm going to show you then, after working on the painting some more this morning, the this is the painting finished up.
Glenn, we had a question. What paper were you using?
Yeah, I'm using Canson My Tint paper. It is notoriously hated by people. I love it. I use it almost exclusively. It's very forgiving, as you can see from my demonstration, all of the adjustments I've made and the changes I've made. I put underneath it about 10 sheets of drawing paper, which provide a cushion to the paper, and it makes it more responsive to my pressure, so that as I apply pressure, either to my drawing stick or to the pastel itself, it has a little bit of a springiness. It pushes back up against the charcoal or against the pastel stick. And I like that. It's the difference between working on a stretched canvas in oils or acrylic and working on a canvas board or on a piece of wood. The mounted boards are wonderful for framing, and obviously the sanded boards give you a tremendous amount of layering ability and richness of color and so on. But I find that I can achieve what I want to with the Canson, even though it doesn't take as many layers, simply the way I work with it. But I know a lot of people find it difficult to work with. I want to show you some examples in the, oops, where'd my thing go? Okay, how do I move this? There we go. Okay, I wanted to show you some examples of manipulating the photographs and stuff. I also wanted to show you a quick example of the vertical. This is the same image with the same dog. This was done actually quite a while ago, and I cropped it as a did it as in a portrait format, making it very, very tightly cropped. And I did keep the yellow handle in there. I liked, again, the way, in this case, it led down. It isn't a distraction. It just seems to continue to lead the eye down and around in this thing. But you can see how very different the look of the overall image is by cropping it into a vertical or a horizontal format. So that becomes a decision, and you might try both. Obviously, I've done things where I've done use similar reference material, and I keep closing this. I've used similar reference material and then moved it around. When I was talking about the aspect ratio, this is what I was referring to. If you extend the line through the photograph from one corner to the opposite corner and then extend it down, these vertical and horizontal framing lines can be moved any place as long as they come to a tip. This will have the same aspect ratio as your photograph. So you don't have to be trying to measure and convert and all of that. You simply say, what size is my paper, or what size do I want it to be? And then draw your diagonal and draw your lines to match up with that. I wanted to show you a couple of examples. This is the original photo reference that I took. I think this was up at Crystal Cove. These kids were playing out in the water, shot this picture. I was especially attracted to the image of the young girl in the center over here. I zoomed in on it. I overexposed it so I could see what was going on in the shadows. And this was the resultant painting. This is a so you may know this artist. These are Tara Will, East Coast artist. These were her children, and she contacted me. She said that she was taking pictures of her children. It made her think of my work. And so she sent me the image. And she said, I don't know if you ever work from other people's images, but would you consider looking at this for a painting? I love the gesture of all four of the children. I love the expression, what they're doing, the energy. There was so much good stuff going on here. But I didn't really like the composition. I didn't like the way he was going out of the paper. I didn't like all of the negative space. This is more about the water, the reflection of the sky in the wet sand, the figures from a design standpoint, although it's interesting because of the perspective and her being so large here in the picture, it didn't work for me. I tried drawing it out this way to see what it looked like, and it just didn't work for me. So I recomposed it, moved all of the kids around, resized them so that proportionally they pulled them in closer to one another and made it a tighter composition. So, and working from her photograph, I did this for her. So she has this painting now. The really simplified the shapes, kept it very loose, and really looked at the design, the reflections, the linkages, and tried to make it a much tighter composition and more intimate, as it were. So taking one photograph and it's like the birds on the wire. You know, they just weren't in the right place for my painting. This is as shot. I had my camera set on sports mode, and I was clicking these kids. I probably got at least 6 or 7 or 8 pictures of them from the time I spotted them as they were running towards the water and heading into the water. This is I'm going to bring this one up. This was another image that I had. And I thought that this one was a little bit, for me, it was a little bit too much going on. And for this painting, I wanted to only include the 3 boys in the front, or to pick out these 3 in the middle here a little bit more. I'd have to look to see when I show you. And I wanted again to change the storyline just a little bit. So it was a little bit more about the bravado of the boys running and crashing into the cold surf, and the distraction of the girls that were maybe standing, not paying them any attention. Oops. So the result was this one. where I took 3 of the images of the boys, put the girls in, and then have him, which is just pulled a little bit away from what they're doing towards the girls. I like to have narrative or a little bit of a story that the viewer can kind of impose on their own storyline on the picture. But because gesture is about emotion and communication, it's expression, I like to look for what, to me, that's expressing and then try to convey that. I'm going to show you just very quickly a couple of other examples that I wanted to share. This is that idea of just assembling images into a composition. Whoops, so that's going to force me into opening Photoshop. I didn't mean to do that. Let me see if I can do this without. There we go. Okay, let me do it this way. Okay, so I had these different images, and here's a bird. Okay. Little girl that was digging in the sand, somebody else standing there on the beach. There are different beaches, different kinds of weather, different times of day. Here was some dogs playing at Dog Park up in Balboa Park. And I just started taking the images and assembling them into a composition that I call Race to the Water's Edge, looking at negative space, overlapping. I had to adjust the lighting mentally on all of the elements so that it felt like they were in the same light. Because the one was a very overcast day, one was a very sunny day. They were in different environments, different settings, different reflected light. So I had to make adjustments to all of it to make it feel like they related to one another from the standpoint of the light source and so on. And then finally, I want to show you some things you can do with a photograph. This is an image that I took of Black's Beach, just north of Scripps Pier in La Jolla. You can walk around here, and then up along here is called Black's Beach. That was the photograph. And I did this for a class. I wanted to show them the breakdown of the shapes into 2 values as a design factor, and how it was balanced, and kind of what those big shapes are, ignoring the details within the photograph, even ignoring the light and shadow within the photograph, and just looking at object and negative space. Then we looked at it as a 2-value or 3-value design, where we separated shadow from light. And then I had the lightest light being the sky and the reflected color in the water. Then we added one more value to it for the foam to get my lightest light. So this became the design, basic design of the landscape. Again, because what we're doing when we're looking at photo reference is we're studying it for information, and we're making decisions about value and shape and relationships. I looked at it as a vertical format composition, looked at it as a square composition. Settled on the horizontal composition, and then without drawing, just blocked in very loosely and kind of expressively, very painterly, that basic design of two values, dark and light. Remember, there was the sky, there was water, there was the cliffs, and then there was this other run of rocks that came out. Oops, here we go. We then added in a little bit more about the planes, adjusted some of the temperature and the values within the darks, added little variation to get some atmospheric perspective where we had the yellows closer to us and going towards the pinks and the blues as the light got further away from us, as the cliffs receded. No drawing at all involved in this, only massing and adjusting values and shapes. And then that was the finish of it. So anyway, I would reiterate then, I'm going to go to stop sharing. I would reiterate again that in using photo reference, it's a wonderful tool. You can use it in a variety of ways. You can combine elements, you can crop, you can zoom, you can, I virtually, for every photograph I use, I consider at least 3 different exposures in studying the photograph. I have the painting as shot, I have the painting overexposed, and I have the painting, or I'm sorry, not the painting, but the photograph as shot, the photograph overexposed, and the photograph underexposed. Because each of those exposure settings gives me different kinds of information about shape, value, and relationship. Okay, so don't copy, express, and use your photographs as a tool, as a resource, as a reference to gain information, to learn more about your subject, as you guys do your, very unique personal expression of your artistic interpretation of your subject. So, is there anything that I think I just 5 minutes? That was not too bad a timing.
Hi,
Glenn,
Glenn.
this is Kath. This was absolutely amazing. And yes, Chris, I think you have a question.
Well, yeah, thanks, Chris Stillians.
Hi, Chris.
Since you're painting on paper, that's what you're painting on. It's not mounted. How are you mounting it for framing? What are you doing to put a rigid support behind it for framing? What do you do?
You know what? I simply hinge it on foam core. And if I'm using a mat that overlaps the edges of the paper, that I put a spacer, and I make sure that the spacer behind the mat is touching the edges of the paper. So it's hinged on the top, typically with three hinges, butterflies, and then the mat board with a foam core spacer behind it. My spacer is usually maybe 1/4 of an inch narrower than the or larger opening than the mat board is, which gives me a channel behind it. But because it lays up against the paper, it holds it in place. If I'm floating the image so that you see the edges of the paper and the mat doesn't extend over the edges of the paper, I'll hinge the top, and then I'll use very tiny, like 2 tiny hinges on the bottom that have a little accordion nature to them that allows the paper to breathe and change with humidity and so on, but it doesn't have the paper simply fall forward and lay up against the glass. So it holds it back, but it's not dry mounted or firmly mounted. It does make for a little bit more difficult framing time. And, but I have found, as long as I use an anti-static cleaner on the inside of the glass or the plexi, and because of the thickness of the mat, the spacer, the anti-static, and the hinges that are holding it back, or the matting around it holding it down, I'm able to ship to New York and all over the place, and have the paintings come back without pastel being all over everything.
Glenn, can you hear me? This is Rick Rotante.
Yes,
Yes, you can hear Rick
Yeah.
Rotante?
yes.
Yes. What pastels are you using? Can you give us a brief description of what you use?
Yeah, I use a tremendous variety. I have Great American, New Pastel, Unison, Mount Vision. I won as a prize from the Pastel
Mungio.
Society
Yeah,
here.
the big set of Mungios.
Yes, and I had never used those before, and they're very chromatic, and they
Yes.
they don't tend to have a lot of gray notes. So I find that I'm kind of going to those for those smaller chromatic areas where I really want
Yes.
color to pop out and so on. So I have just almost every one that you can imagine. I do find myself, when I first started, I really used a lot. I mean, I was using Schminke, which is a very, very soft pastel, and Sennelier, also very soft. I find I'm using more and more of the harder sticks of like the New Pastel. I really like the New Pastel. It doesn't fill up the tooth at all. It lays down a lot of color, and it allows me then to come back over the top with the softer pastels in the lighter colors, to really make some strong statements. So
I just wanted to-
I kind of progress from harder to softer as my painting develops. I kind of find it going in that direction. But I also find that the New Pastels, because they're harder and they don't by themselves drop as much pigment on the paper, that I can actually use them to feather the colors together,
Right.
the edges
Right.
together. That I can push pigments around using other pigments, and they're wonderful for things like reflected light and getting that woof and warp of the pigment elements, where they kind of meld together without blending together. I do no blending at all. I would say,
Yes, I noticed.
religiously, I do not put my fingers on the paper
Yes.
and
Yes.
smudge. I find that dulls color.
Yes.
If I want to gray, I gray things down. I do it by bringing complements together, by pushing the pigments together with one another with their sticks. But I don't go in and press against it with my hand or with a stump or anything like that.
I just want to say one other thing and then let you go. Is I am working in my garage also,
Oh.
and I have a heater that I turn on about a half an hour before I come into work. And you can
Yes.
see I'm still wearing my scarf,
Yes.
and I also use my tent.
Okay,
I
good.
enjoyed
Well,
that
good for you.
paper.
Good
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
you. Good for you.
And
There
I
are
enjoyed this. I enjoyed this very much. You're a master pastelist, and it was a pleasure to see your work.
Thank you so much. Well, I hope you guys will visit my site and take a look at the other stuff I do at glenmaxion.com. And I'm looking forward to IAPS. This will be my first year to attend IAPS. And so I hope I'll see Otto, are you going to be there?
Oh, my goodness.
It's
I
still
don't-
up in the air.
Oh.
Unfortunately, I've got a lot of different projects that I'm working on right now. So I'm gonna try. If anything, I'm making a road trip because this year I got my master circle status.
Yeah. Oh, good.
So-
Got it.
Wonderful.
I'm gonna hope, and I want to represent PSSC and hopefully walk the stage, but as of now, this might be difficult to do so.
Yeah, well, I had to go because this year I'll get eminent Pastelis.
No way! All right.
Yeah, yeah.
I had no idea you'd never been there before. I cannot believe it. I feel like I've seen you there every
never
year.
been. I'm kind of a recluse that I go out in the garage. No, I didn't even notice COVID because I don't see people. I'm so antisocial anyway, you know. So
Yes.
I just go out in the garage, and every once in a while my wife will come out and say, "Did you remember to drink something? You know, you need to come in and eat some food." You know, because I go out there, I'm gone. You know, are there any other questions?
Glenn, I have a question. This is
Yes.
Sally.
Hey,
Springer.
Sally!
Hi, Sally.
Hi.
Glenn. How are you?
Hi.
That was fabulous. I have a question, because if you don't print out your subject matter, which I know you don't, because I watched you do this before and it was fabulous. But if you're not printing it out, how are you getting the aspect ratio if you're not laying the photo
You
on?
yeah, you would have to do that. But see, I don't tend to use the shape of the photograph as any kind of a reference for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I see you're
Um,
composing it all.
Yeah, I'm just composing as I go and determining the size, the proportions, the relationships, the placement of things. You know,
And you're working from your computer monitor.
and I'm working
so-
from the computer.
Yeah.
I would also say, if you're working from in an ideal setup, you would have your source material. If you're right-handed, you would have it at eye level on the left-hand side of your paper, so that you don't have to turn your head and cross midline. You don't want to be drawing here and looking over here.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
you want to be looking this way. So you want to draw here and have your source material here. I don't have that set up. And my computer monitor is off to the right, and I got to go over here. So when I'm actually doing, under normal circumstances, I take my board off of the easel and I lay it in front of my monitor at an angle, and I draw looking at my monitor directly in front of me.
Okay,
And
your
then I move
eyeball.
it, and then, yeah, just when I'm doing my sketching. I
Yeah.
did for this demonstration because I wouldn't have been able to photograph it. But then I'll put it up on the easel, because all I'm doing when I'm looking at the photo reference now is capturing the gesture of value, the gesture of the shadow or the gesture of the light. And I don't.
Glenn, forgive me.
Yeah.
This is Rick Rotante one more time. I have low battery happening on my iPad, so I have to leave you. Thank you very much.
Thank you
I
so
will go to your
much.
website.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rick, thank you for joining us. Yes.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay, I'm happy. It's only 6 after 8. I know we're supposed to end at 8, but if anybody has any other questions, happy to take them briefly. Yeah, sounds like we're okay.
Great.
Well, I was just gonna mention, Glenn, I tried to get into your class at IAPS. I think I did, but I'm not sure. But this is also my first time going, so I'm really excited.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, I was teaching a Zoom class, but I stopped a year ago. I'm not doing any classes at this time. I thought about it and I may do it again. I really enjoy the in-person stuff,
Great.
you know. So, but anyway, it was a joy. I apologize if I was a little discombobulated and trying to get things pulled together. Again, there's so much just on taking pictures, you know, just that aspect of it. To study. I learned a lot about figure drawing, studying the photography of master photographers, you know, from the 1930s and 40s and 50s and stuff, shooting in black and white. You know, I have found so many different places to look to understand more about value, design, composition, gesture, emotion, expression, and so on. Doesn't really matter the medium. Rodin, big influence, Degas, big influence. The reason I ended up doing the beach scenes is I wanted a place I could take pictures of people in a natural setting where you could see and study the figure, and where they were expressing themselves gesturally in a way that I could really be expressive in the way that I was trying to do with my 1 and 2 minute poses in the studio. So it was my movement from life drawing in the studio to gathering photo reference at the beach, and then using that with my experience and knowledge about figure drawing to develop my images. I wanted to be able to do more sustained studies. I wanted to do more complex compositions. I wanted to be able to spend hours studying 10-second poses, essentially.
It's kind of like with animals, you can't get them to hold still either.
Yeah,
In a couple weeks,
exactly.
we're going to be doing whimsy. I'm going to be doing a lot with animals,
Ah,
using also photo references to compose.
yeah.
Yes, and I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure everybody here
Yeah.
knows that on the 24th, Lynn will be presenting with us Whimsy. So hope to see
Wonderful.
all of you back here again for another fine Thursday. Glenn, this was amazing. Thank you so much. I took plenty of notes and to take forward with me, and I'm going to be glad to see you at IUPS. That'll be for sure.
Thanks so much for inviting me. It's great to see all of you guys. Hope to see you in person soon.
Thank you, Glenn.